Boys and girls, another day, another episode of the HUD. Welcome, everyone, to the HUD episode number 3. Episode number 3. Of course, we're live from what would be my current location. But no, today we're talking about a number of different awesome stuff. Today's going to be jam-packed with roster talk, roster mania. If you want to call it roster mania, I'm not sure what technically defines roster mania as roster mania. Being known as Mr. Roster Mania, you think that I would know something along those lines. However, I do not. But yes, roster talk, roster moves are in the air. COD Champs, MLG, Orlando, August 6th, and I believe qualifiers for NA happen on August 12th. Those are looming. Everyone's thoughts, I know it's always practice could be Orlando, and they only are going to have 1 week to, in some ways, make sure that their Orlando rosters will be set in stone, and if they feel confident, most likely we'll definitely see some roster changes happen. Obviously, right now, heading into Orlando, and maybe even a few after Orlando does come to pass, because I'm sure not everyone is going to be able to get the placing that they would like. So, for today, of course, you guys can see off to the right side, the lineup we have is obviously roster talk, which is going to be a major portion of this particular show. But as well, and if you look at the lineup, the Infinite Warfare gameplay was released. I believe we had like a full-on mission to look at, which would be kind of necessarily breaking down exactly, how am I going to say this? It's not exactly like crazy because it is the campaign, but it's not going to be a majority of the show. It wasn't. It was a mission, which we'll kind of be breaking down. We're not going to be talking about the full aspects of, well, what guns did we see, stuff like that. However, we are going to be looking at some of the gameplay that was released, and also at San Diego Comic-Con, which is where all this stuff ended up happening at, which is obviously great. They released a number of different things. I'm not sure if the release date was already known or not, but that was kind of talked about. Game Over Greggy was hosting it all, and overall, I was really, really impressed by it. But I'm not going to go into it too much because, of course, that's going to happen toward the later part of the show. But before we hop into stuff, before we kind of introduce ourselves for good, I want to give a massive shout out to everyone so far who has followed the stream off air, on air, whatever it has been. Massive shout out to Josh the Don, Angel Compy, Mr. Classic Temps, KHRXMA. I'm sorry, I might have said that incorrectly or misquoted that if it's an actual name. Cosmos, Snowy Christmas, Venom, Zumi, Viper, Adam Abdi, Alhan, I think it's how I say it. Flynn, Mason, and last but not least, just on the screen right there, Clemmy, I think is maybe how you say it. But guys, thank you so much for the follows. Greatly, greatly appreciated. Welcome to the HUD. If you guys are new, if you guys aren't used to the HUD episodes, this is in some ways what I like to call the Call of Duty Esports radio show. People have talked about, people have kind of mentioned, what should you put on a webcam? I'm thinking about it. I'm getting really toward the point where I'm thinking about having a webcam pop up. I recently shaved what was a mediocre beard, and I'm just not super confident about it, if I'm honest. I'm not super confident how I look right now, not that I was past. So I'm kind of skeptical about it. So it might be like maybe a week or two before we might have the webcam kind of happen. I've also got people asking me on Twitter, when are we going to have a full-on schedule for the HUD? That's going to be coming very shortly. My goal is to just make the HUD whenever it happens. Like, it happens, it happens. I think it's kind of cool to not really have a set schedule. But you also have to keep in mind as well, scheduling makes things a lot easier. I think it would be good maybe if we have a solidified day that happens every week at a specific time, to where it's kind of benefits what's going on with the schedule for the Call of Duty World League, and what happens with future tournaments and stuff like that. My goal is to do event recaps of the tournaments that I'm not going to be at, so on and so forth. So if you guys have any ideas, have any in some way suggestions for a schedule for a certain time to do it at, feel free to let me know that as well. And I also tried to make this show and tailor it to the EU fans as well. I believe it's around 11 BST, if that is correct. I looked forever for the time zones in that graphic that I posted earlier, so I want to make sure that I got that correct. Whatever time it is currently across the pond over in Europe, I try to tailor it to you guys. I know it's currently around 11 or maybe even midnight for some of you, so I do apologize for that, but my previous shows, they've been in the middle of the night, 3 or 4 in the morning for you guys, so I'm trying to tailor it to you guys, trying to make it so that everyone can watch and make it at a good time for everyone. So now that we've got the formal kind of stuff out of the way, that we've kind of talked with one another, I want to mention as well, for those who don't have already an AC unit. Okay, someone put 11 BST. Perfect. Thank you very much, George. For those who don't have an AC unit, now I'm not sponsored. This is not a sponsored podcast. We don't have any sponsors yet for the HUD. Hoping to find it soon. However, though, if you do not have an AC unit, I promise you that it will change your life. Now, I'm not saying any specific AC unit. I'm saying a certain company. However, if you get an AC unit, I promise it will revolutionize your gaming setup. It's true. I've had one. I recently purchased one maybe 2 weeks ago, and I wanted to get a full-on, I guess you could say, suggestion out there, a full-on, just I don't want to say discussion. But yeah, it's great. It's fantastic. So for those who are kind of curious, like if your game setup is really hot, it's personally steaming in my room. It's kind of a small room and got a lot of monitors, got computers and stuff like that. So it can get a little bit toasty at times. But I would highly suggest that if you are considering getting an AC unit, that you do it today. So that has been Landon's word of advice for the HUD episode 3. We've just started it. It's the premiere, and I think it's great. So with that in mind, now let's finally start talking about the major topics for today's episode. We talked about roster talk. I mentioned that roster talk will be the main focus of today. However, I want to recap you guys very, very briefly on the current champs qualifications that are going down right now in the EU as well as the ANZ also. So, of course, everyone knows that there's going to be 32 teams overall that are going to be competing at Call of Duty World League Championship or Call of Duty XP 2016, if you want to call it either one. And I believe so far from the European side, there have been 4 teams who have qualified outside of the playoffs because, of course, the top teams from the playoffs of NA, EU, and ANZ automatically get a spot. Not really playoffs, but points overall combined from Stage 1 to Stage 2 as well. And those teams obviously already qualified. But we also have recently found out that 4 more teams have made it from the EU through this recent tournament that happened actually today online, which has been Epsilon, Exertus, Giants, and LDLC. Very, very familiar faces, obviously, so it looks like you're going to have a good amount of the EU teams from the regular CWL Stage 2 in there automatically. I know I saw Epsilon announcing pretty earlier on today. I think LDLC was a more recent one to kind of occur. So applause to them. Of course, from ANZ, I don't think that we've seen anything exactly happen yet. I've not been able to check out exactly as far as the bracket is concerned with them as of this moment. But just know that it's going to be happening very shortly as far as updates for the ANZ. And of course, NA not happened yet. It's going to be happening August 12th, which I mentioned a little bit earlier. And that's kind of how it's going for right now, guys. So I'm going to read you guys off the list of teams who have qualified for the Stage 2 Championship, of course, like I said, Call of Duty XP, and then we will move on to roster talk, which is, of course, the main topic of today's show. Now, I want to point out, before I read these names off, if you guys have any questions, now is the time to either post them, if it's relating to roster stuff. If it's relating to roster stuff, feel free to post those as I'm talking about that specific team. If you guys don't even want to just ask me, ask the chat, talk with the chat. I would love to do that. I think it'd be honestly be a fun time to kind of talk about certain things, your thoughts on what teams you think might make a roster change, maybe not make a roster change. If you guys have any suggestions, any thoughts at all, post it in the comments. Or in the chat. It's not the comments, the Twitch chat. It's legendary. Feel free to do that as we obviously start to kind of go over what would be roster top. Before we do that, though, like I said, qualified teams so far for the Call of Duty XP tournament. These teams will 100% be there unless otherwise stated, like if they get disqualified, which I don't think is actually going to happen. So with that in mind, we do have from, I don't want to say region because it's just kind of out of order. We have Dream Team. Epsilon Esports, Exertus Esports, FaZe Clan, Giants, Hyper Games, Luminosity, Millennium, Mindfreak, Optic Gaming, Rise Nation, Splice, Team Envious, Team Infused, Team LDLC, and Team Orbit ANZ. I believe that is 16, if my mind is correct. I think 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, maybe not. I don't know. That's a good amount of teams, though. That's like almost half, or maybe half if I'm... Well, let me just count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Okay, it's not... It is half. It is half. So, half of the spots already for Call of Duty XP have been taken up. So if you guys are curious, those are the teams who have qualified. I apologize. I was trying to make sure that I had it correctly because in my mind I was looking at the rows. Like there's 4 rows of 8, and I was like, there has to be 32, right? So yeah, it was kind of confusing. I apologize. So with that in mind, those are the squads who have officially qualified for Call of Duty XP. Applause for them. Boom. And now we'll be moving on to the roster talk for today. It was a beautiful transition, I know. So yes, roster moves that have happened. I'm gonna first of all preface the topic of roster moves with the fact that this potentially, and should be, in my opinion, this should be one of the craziest roster swaps. If you want to call it roster mania, I would take that definition. Like I said earlier, I'm not sure what the definition of roster mania is, even though being known as Mr. Roster Mania, I'm not 100% sure if the definition is like, there's a certain amount of roster changes that qualify it being known as roster mania. Like 4 teams change, that qualifies as roster mania. I'm not really sure. So roster moves is what I'm calling it. I would normally call it roster mania. But this is supposed to be and could potentially be one of the craziest roster manias that we've had so far in Black Ops 3. Even though we already have 6 of the top squads and all of the NA are already locked in, there is definitely a potential for stuff to happen, which is, of course, what we've seen over the past couple of days. And like I said earlier, it's not that we have Orlando after the qualifiers. It's that the qualifiers happen August 12th. right? So that's like, what, we have another week left in July. And a couple more days, basically 2 weeks and a couple more days until the qualifiers. But of course, MLG Orlando's coming up. You've got to keep that in mind when it comes down to making roster decisions. Having MLG Orlando is going to be a big test for a lot of these teams. You might see a lot of roster swaps happen around the August 4th, August 5th time, if they haven't already put in a roster for MLG Orlando. And shortly after that, the fact of Call of Duty XP is coming up. At least the qualifiers for Call of Duty XP are coming up, at least for the NA side of things. You got to imagine that this is going to be a testament for a lot of squads. If something immediately doesn't feel right, if something's wrong, roster changes can happen easy as that. So, first of all, we've obviously seen a major roster change happen from the lineup known as H2k. Lacefield has officially announced. Well, I'm going to say this. I don't believe that H2k has officially announced, made an article post saying, yes, Lacefield has left the team. The team will currently be looking for 3 heading into MLG Orlando and Call of Duty XP 2016. That has not been a full-on move. However, you can kind of get a general idea when a player makes a statement saying a certain thing. I don't want to say that you should take the player's word for it all the time, but normally that means that they are either very mad or in a position where they definitely want to leave the team, or that they are in highly contention of thinking about leaving the squad. So with that in mind, you can basically assume that either Lacefield is off the team or will shortly be off the team. As far as, I don't know how the contract works with H2K. I wish I did know that information, but unfortunately I do not. So, how do I preface this? H2K was a squad for me who I've enjoyed watching for a while, right? Because this is a team who formed. They were previously, they were under Apotheon. Like the beginning of stage 1, they were under the name of Apotheon. They qualified with that team. It's been a team through and through who people looked at and were like, you know what? I was kind of surprised at how well this squad has done. Like, there's not really a whole lot of known things about this H2K lineup besides Fizzup's previous history. If you've known Fears, if you've seen Legal, past teams with Prophecy and Fears, those guys kind of teaming up together on Prophecy for a while. But Lacefield was a rising star, man. He was a rising star. Played for Mutiny. Back in Advanced Warfare with guys like Reviction, guys like Neglect casted over him many, many times. And was able to kind of witness his talent and saw how good that he was on a consistent basis no matter what the game type was. So to see Lacefield kind of rise up from being an amateur in some ways to the end of Advanced Warfare, kind of getting a little more known, then heading into Black Ops 3 and just kind of being this rising star for what was an H2K team who looked very, very talented. It's a shame that recently, though, since they've had this team house, since they've had all this communication with one another, you would think, and for the most part, that a team house is meant to, I'll say this, for the casual, not necessarily the casual fan, but to the naked eye, most people would assume that a team house means work. That means, hey, we've got a lot more opportunities to work on our game, to try and work on things, to try and improve ourselves. We don't have to worry about someone getting on because we know exactly where they are, and that's all true, right? That's 100% true. But it also can kind of, in some ways, get you comfortable. And that's the issue with the Call of Duty World League. It's not the Call of Duty World League's fault. It's the fault with some of the players because they assume that, hey, we're getting a lot of Call of Duty World League practice. We're playing matches 2 times a week. We can scrim, here and there. But as long as we're getting our Call of Duty World League practice, there's nothing really wrong with it. We're playing pretty well at some of the tournaments. We had a good run at South Carolina. We took it out to gaming. We placed, the top 5, top 6. We had a good run there, which was obviously much longer before the team house came into play. But they've looked inconsistent for a long time. And I'm not sure if that was the issue of practice or if it's been more of a recent thing. I haven't personally contacted Lacefield. He's a good dude. Talked to him many times before. However, though, I've not talked to him about the practice regimen, and was it a recent thing? Had it happened over a long period of time? Maybe you guys might actually know that. However, the lack of practice was definitely evident coming into the event. Many people were kind of posting this on Reddit. I was kind of a little bit worried for them because I know that players in 8s as well as in regular streams have talked about H2K, how they're not willing to practice. Why isn't H2K looking for a scrim? I thought they were scrimming earlier. Apparently they weren't. And that was just the vibe that I got, so I wasn't for sure if they were just practicing off stream, if they were practicing against teams that I just happened to not be watching, so on and so forth. And then, it comes down to the last event, comes down to Season 2 finals, and they get 4-0'd. They get completely dominated. And in the post-game interview, I believe it was Fizzup who ends up talking. Might have been to Maven. I'm not even sure who was interviewing them. I think it was Maven, though. And Fizzup just straight up said, we did not practice. And at that point, I was like, you did not practice? How do you go into the Season 2 finals in which you barely made it? right? I think it was what? It was between them and Elevate, right? It was between them and Elevate. In the game between Rise and Elevate, I believe the last match of all the CWL, because Luminosity Gaming was like a point, like 0, 1, I don't even know, a lot of digits right after the regular number, that they were able to qualify, and it came down to this match between Rise and Elevate. If Elevate ended up winning, then that means that they qualify for Stage 2 playoffs. And if Rise won, then that means that they would have H2k make it to Stage 2 playoffs, and it would be Elevate who would kind of fall into that 9th spot, which ended up happening. So the fact is that when it comes down to the lack of practice, just kind of generalizing things again, when you are coming into a tournament like that one, when you have the top teams in the world, if you want to throw some EU teams in there, maybe even an ANZ squad here or there to say they're like the top 10, but when you are clearly playing against the best region in the world, in which in a tournament where you barely made it wasn't even your call if you made it or not. Your tournament lives, your life of making it into the playoffs was not decided by you, and yet you come into the tournament and do not practice, at least enough, right? Because there was talks, and I believe that from what I've heard and seen mostly pro players talk about, as well as the community talk about, was saying that the only players who were really scrimming from this team are really trying to practice a lot, playing 8s, playing maybe even wagers as well, was the guys of Legal and Lacefield. It was the fact that Fears and Fizzerp not really wanting to play too much. People were talking about the social media aspect of Fears and Fizzerp, talking about how they constantly just went out, didn't really practice that often. You were kind of living like the party lifestyle. There's nothing wrong with that, right? There's nothing wrong with that. But you have to realize that if the league is over, or even during the league, the way that you get better is by practicing more than the best team in the world, which is Optic Gaming. If you're not even practicing nearly as much as Optic is, then you're going to stay exactly where you're at, or you're not going to improve to be at the same point as they are. The point that you get better than the best team in the world is by practicing just as much as them and also more than them, and practicing against them. That's how you get stronger than some of the best teams in the world. That's not coming from me necessarily. That's information that I've learned over players talking in past. That's coming from teams like Team Caliber, who in Black Ops 2 weren't the best squad in the world, but you know what? They would scrim complexity nearly every day. Nearly every day. They would get to that top 2 spot. God love them, they didn't end up winning a tournament. But they practice hard. They were practicing basically just as much as anyone else, maybe even more than everyone else. But the thing was that they were playing against the best team in the world. And I was watching scrims last night. Optic was trying to find a scrim, and it seems like a lot of teams were kind of saying, like, oh no, we already have a scrim. And I'm not sure if that was just awkward timing, or if people just don't want to scrim Optic. And that's the issue for me, that if teams are not willing to scrim Optic Gaming, and maybe, like I said, I want to throw this out there, I'm not sure what the reasons are behind those teams who they were trying to face off against. I'm not going to lie, I was working on other stuff in the background, so I only heard them talking and saying, wow, we can't actually get a scrim. This is like the Optic Blacklist thing all over again, so don't even get me started on that. But if you're not willing to if I'm facing off against a team and Optic says, hey, team scrim, I'm like, oh, sorry guys, like we got to move on. We got to play against this team. And honestly, I don't know the likelihood of what it is to be a professional player. I feel like I have a lot of experience as far as knowing them for following the scene for as long as I have. But if you're not willing to practice against the best team on a consistent basis, regardless of what happened last night, and I'm not even sure that the rules would happen, that I'm not even taking that last night seriously because it was probably just timing. But if you're not willing to practice against the best team in the world, let alone practice at all heading into a tournament, let alone the overall consensus of what would happen at this LAN, you don't even know. And with apparently already a little bit of strife coming in the roster. I'm not saying strife, but I mean, you got to imagine if there's only 2 guys practicing on a team of 4, and it's a half split, guaranteed there are some conversations that happen whenever they're losing scrims, and Legal and Lacefield are saying like, hey, what are you guys doing? Like, why are we not playing? I'm sure Lacefield is a very vocal guy, as well as Legal is. There's 2 of the younger guys on the team. Fears and Fizzerp have been playing for a very long time. Which normally you would think that it'd be the reverse, right? You think it'd be the younger guys who maybe just aren't necessarily not as mature, but are in a position to where that the younger guys maybe just don't realize this position that they're in. They don't really realize that, hey, I'm in a really good spot here. I want to try to keep this. But it's not the case, though. It's not the case, and that's kind of a shaking up thing, because we've known, and personally knowing Fizzerp's character, knowing how talented that he is, that is something that I've never seen from Fizzerp. It's never been a mentality of, I don't want to play this game. I mean, during Ghost, during Advanced Warfare, when Fizzerp and Killa, Study, Space Team, those guys were one of the best teams, I was seeing Killa. I was seeing because Killa wasn't really streaming back then, but I was watching Fizzerp consistently play Search and Destroy tournament. So it's a little bit of a surprise to me seeing. I'm not trying to focus on H2k for too long because of course we got a lot of stuff other to talk about. My consensus is on the fact of Lacefield leaving the team. To me, it was expected. I was curious to see how they would do in Stage 2 finals, not even knowing about their practice regimen, that it was basically non-existent. But the fact is, you've got to practice. That's like the most... It's probably like the most basic thing that I can say, but it's one of the most basic things that I can say, but it's one of the hardest things to actually put into context. It's one of the hardest things to actually do. Because I can understand the game gets boring, man. The game gets tiring after a while. Whether you think Black Ops 3 is a good game or not, I personally think it's a great game. I don't play it 9-10 hours a day as obviously the pros do. Maybe you guys do at home. Maybe you guys play wagers, UMG, GBs, whatever it is, whatever the case is. But the game at times can get a little bit stale, and I can understand that. But when it is your profession and you're coming into a tournament, you have got to make sure that all ends are met, that the things that you've been working on are good to go. Because Call of Duty World League is not going to do it for you. That's like, and I've said this in my first show that we had. I said this in the previous show. I was talking about, whenever, I think it might have been the day of that that Fizzerp had mentioned. No, it wasn't. It was basically the recap for Stage 1 playoffs, and I was kind of recapping and saying that in some ways the Call of Duty World League, it is a test as far as school is concerned. The way that you get ready for that test is by doing your homework, which is by practicing. It's by practicing and going over things that you struggle with, whatever the issue may be, whether it's your hardpoint, your search and destroy strategies, uplink routes, rotations and hardpoint, any label that you can put as far as a competitive game type is concerned, the things you need to work on, those ends need to be met. And in the Call of Duty World League matches, that's when you broadcast, and that's when you show off your work that you are trying to portray. That's when you show off, in some ways, and try to get all the answers right. Now, like I said, you're not going to have the easiest weeks. If you have Optic Gaming, you have Envious, you have FaZe, Rise, or whoever you want to throw in there, a team who is considerably more talented than you, you're going to have 0-2 weeks, right? But that's the time where you work on the things that you're struggling with and move on from it and try to continue on. So the fact is that, of course, H2k has, in some ways, lost a major player in Lacefield, in my opinion, probably one of the more talented sub-players that we have in all of the game right now, at least in the pro scene. And the current team, as far as we know right now, consists of Legal, Fears, and Fizzerp. If you want to put replacements in question, I know they've been playing with Accuracy, I believe, for the last 2 days. Accuracy, a good player in his own regard. Seems to kind of have a little bit of struggles when it comes down to solidifying and getting on a for-sure team. You can name off probably like I won't say 5 or 6, maybe like 4 or 5 teams that he's been on for a very short period of time that just really have not lasted, whether it's been necessarily his fault, but it might have just been what the team wasn't looking for. And he was on the original Cloud9 team, I think like Killa and Sinful, and who was the other player? Khalifa, I think, heading into South Carolina. Those guys don't have the best performance, and they immediately released all of those guys. So he's been on some teams. He's been practicing with some squads. You've seen him sub in at times in the Call of Duty World League, but nothing has been solidified for him. So the fact is they're adding an AR player, getting rid of one of their more talented sub players. Curious to see how that kind of works out. I personally have not been able to witness the exact role changes that have gone on, I'd imagine, in their scrims and whatnot. But I do hope that team does stick together, at least for the most part. I want to see Fears and Fizzerp get back on their grind, because if they don't, well, you'll see continuous results. And maybe at Orlando, it could be a question. They put the roster in question, and they say, you know what, Orlando, if it works, we'll move on. If it doesn't, maybe the roster splits up. Who knows? We'll see what happens. Good luck to H2k, of course. I do hope that the grind does continue for them. And I wish the best, of course, for Lacefield as well. He's a good dude, very talented. And, yeah. So we're going to move on. Now, talk on H2k. If you guys want to continue to talk about certain stuff like that, feel free to let me know. Because, of course, things are happening all the time. I'm not able to witness and go on streams right now and be able to see what's going on. This is about the time where your rosters start to kind of, not really form, but when teams start to scrim and stuff like that. So if you guys are seeing anything, feel free to let me know. Even tweet at me, tweet at the HUD TV, tweet at me, L1 Lano. I'll definitely be able to check it. If you do tweet at the HUD TV, it's probably a little bit easier because I'll be able to see it on my phone and as well as on my timeline because that's what I have pulled up. So if you guys have any things you want to talk about, post them in the chat, tweet it at the HUD TV, and I'm sure we'll at least get to it, or at least I will be able to see it. So next thing was, I think, a more recent one that I noticed, and there's been a lot of, I want to say, a lot of focus around the Cloud9 of late. And for those who are curious, we'll definitely be talking about the recent squads who have been forming. I know everyone's been talking about the Ix and Ricky thing for a very long time. Like, there was like a as soon, like literally the last match that Complexity played, there were starting of rumors that night where everyone was like, wow, Aches and Ricky here might be teaming. Or might even been before the league was over, where people talking about Aches and Ricky are going to be forming. And then we saw a tweet a long time ago from Aches saying and tweeting at Complexity how he missed them and stuff like that, which if we see Cole Aches again, I'll be very excited for that. I'm not going to lie. But then, of course, we're talking about Cloud9 right now, trying to get back on topic, trying to stay in my lane, trying to focus on the same thing right now. So yeah, Cloud9 Eclipse, two teams, same organization. One of them the Call of Duty World League, one of them known as a pretty talented challenger team, or challenge team. I think it's challenge, not challenger. I've been saying it wrong for the entire year, apparently. But you have some really, really, really talented young guys on this team. You look at guys like Havoc, you look at guys like Assault, who are very, very talented. Havoc, a guy who can literally go off in every single game type on a consistent basis, and no matter what the squad he's facing off against, you would never be able to tell that he's having a good game or having a bad game, because the guy just plays consistently well. He's one of the most consistent players, and as young as he is, rising talent through Advanced Warfare with Isolation Empire, he finds himself on Cloud9 for Black Ops 3. Once he turned the age of 18, immediately added him to the roster. Great pickup for the Cloud9 organization. When you look at those two guys, those are two guys that you can, without a doubt, form a organization around. Those are two guys who can literally put a team on the map and put them in a top 8, top 5 position potentially. But it is incredible to see the rise of Havoc throughout this year. I mean, there's been a lot of guys. There's been a lot of guys in the pro scene who have kind of risen. Advanced Warfare, like I said, you had guys like Hook, Temp, TJ, Octane. I think Octane is probably, as well as Hook, the most developed players through Advanced Warfare. Octane regarded as the top 2, top 3 AR. Throughout this game, if you want to throw formal slasher guys like that in there, even any other players, which is totally fine. He's definitely in contention, and at times has been in contention for the top player as far as the AR position goes. Unfortunately, Hook moved on to Halo. Got a lot of love for Hook. Incredibly awesome guy. Black Ops 3, though, we've seen a little bit of a different story, though. We've seen a different story. We've seen more pro players kind of rise up that have been on these teams who we didn't really know how they would perform. Guys like Lacefield. Guys like Cole Chan, who was previously on TSM. I see previously TSM. We'll talk about them in a minute, but they're kind of on a TBA. Like, TSM has kind of released the team. Yeah, the team is still a thing, kind of, which we'll talk about. You also have my main guy, Havoc, man. Havoc's incredible, if I'm honest. I will continuously say this. I think he's a top 2 sniper right now in the pro scene. Incredible SMG player, Slayer, as well as getting the objective. The guy gets the work done. He gets the work done, and Assault does as well. Assault was later added to the team. He was on Cloud9 Eclipse. For those who don't know, I believe he was on the Justice team along with Kenny, Envoy, and Spacely. I think that was at South Carolina. At DC, I think I casted over them at DC. They had some good performances. That might have been the team who ended up taking out FaZe, if my mind does serve me correctly. And also the team who ended up placing top 5 or top 6 at MLG Worlds. Kenny Envoy, amazing sub duo, and those guys, and Assault was just an amazing AR. And ever since then, I was like, wow, these guys are like, he's a big time player. Like, and whenever it was announced, and I had heard through the grapevine that he's going to be added to the Cloud9 Eclipse roster, I was like, perfect. Like, this is going to be awesome. Really excited to see how he performs. And he comes out and he just plays great. He had subbed in previously. I think he had like a 1 series game, or might have been like 1 map where he had a pretty low KD. But it really doesn't matter, right? It comes down to regular consistency, I believe, for anyone's really opinion. So the fact is, I ended up seeing not really a scrimmage, but I forget what team I was watching, in which it was Assault, who's actually playing with the current roster, the running team of Aches, Ricky, Miracles, as well as himself. And that kind of threw up a red flag for me, because I was like, wow, Assault's the guy who's going to kind of lead this team. And coming into this team, I thought, maybe he would probably stay with the roster. I thought maybe Havoc and him would try to stay together. But at that time, I was kind of putting that into question. So they scrimmed that night. I didn't really see anything of it. Didn't really happen too much. However, though, then I started to see that team of Aches, Ricky, and Miracles, then Aches and Ricky by themselves playing with other guys. They ended up finding someone else. They ended up adding Parasite to the running roster. So I was like, what happened to Assault? Like, what happened to this guy? And now, apparently, it is the case that there are 3 players, if you want to talk about for the Cloud9 team, because, of course, Lamagod announced that he leaves Cloud9. And now, technically, there are 3 players on the roster. Now, before I talk about the 3 players who are on the roster, I want to point out that Lamagod is a very talented guy. I think he's definitely a top player, but I'm not sure if this was a decision in which he wanted to leave, if he wasn't comfortable with the team, or if this is like Cloud9 saying, hey, we want to form a roster around Assault and Havoc. We appreciate everything you've done. Goodbye. Something along those lines. And I'm not sure like exactly what the conversation that was had. I'm not sure exactly how that all went down, obviously. However, it wasn't a huge surprise that we did see a roster change come from the Cloud9 team. I feel like there was not necessarily a weak link on the roster, but there were just at some points where you would see a little bit of slower gameplay. They didn't really have the exact slaying factor that a lot of people would have liked. So it's not a huge surprise that we do see Llama leave. He did end up finding his role in Cloud9. Constantly talked about after his run with Velocity at UMG South Carolina, played with Ego, Moach, and Examples. Before Examples, kind of became a player for 100 Thieves. Marchillo was on the Cloud9 team and stuff like that. He was a talented guy, and people didn't really put into perspective how good that he was. So all the most respect for Lamagod. I think he's a great player. Obviously played on Isolation Empire in past. It's kind of funny to me personally that we do in some ways, or have had, the Cloud9 team as far as Eclipse and the regular roster go, and the whole team of Isolation Empire is kind of spread out through that team, because you have Havoc, you have Dito, you have Silly, and you also obviously have Lamagod, who was obviously a fantastic team, Isolation Empire through Advanced Warfare. So it was good to see those duos return. I was a big fan of the Isolation Empire roster through Advanced Warfare. Not really known players. Those 3 guys kind of rose through that title. Dito, of course, being more of a experienced player. Wasn't really having a whole lot of success finding teammates and stuff like that. Went down in some ways, started finding S&D players and stuff like that, and kind of formed this roster who was in some ways a middle-of-the-pack team, but we're a top 5, top 6 team on a very, very consistent basis, and at times took out some major squads, taking out FaZe, taking out some big-name squads, just kind of added to what was a fantastic run for these guys. So the fact is, Llama leaves Cloud9, good player in his own regard. Like I said, it was not a huge surprise in my opinion. He's good friends with Mochila. Those guys. I don't even know if they live close to each other, but I know they post pictures a lot where they're kind of involved, or they're hanging out or doing something like that. So it wouldn't be a surprise for me if we do see him kind of team up, with him on our particular roster. And the Cloud9 drama, though, wouldn't end. It wasn't just, Lamagod leaves Cloud9, he tweets out free agency, boom, that's it. Dito ended up tweeting out, of course, the captain, I believe, of Cloud9 Eclipse, or at least he's the main player for Cloud9 Eclipse that most people will recognize. He tweeted out and announced himself in Mox. I think, is it pronounced Mox? I'm honestly not even sure yet. Which I didn't really know too much about him until I started to realize, how long he's been playing. Not really how long he's been playing for, but the consistency of him for the Cloud9 Eclipse roster. But he announced him, and Mox as well would be looking for 2 players, which obviously leads up the question of what happens to Silly and what happens to Swarly, right? What happens to those guys? Now, I'm going to point out this is a really, really smart decision that Cloud9 has done throughout this entire year, and I don't know the contracts, if the, if you want to call it the pro team or the team who's in the main roster for the Call of Duty World League team. I'm not 100% sure if this was planned at the beginning. However, though, you do, and they did have, it's a pretty smart strategy. It's a pretty smart strategy to have 2 teams where you can kind of in some ways make roster changes within your organization without having to swap a number of different names. It's not like, oh, hey, TSM, oh, hey, MV, oh, hey, FaZe, oh, hey, Rise. It's the fact of, hey, we can make a roster change within our own organization. Don't have to sign anything. We're literally shaking hands with ourselves. So the fact is, I'm not sure if they kind of walked in that opportunity and said, hey, this is actually a pretty good idea. And it's not a bad strategy, to be honest. If we see teams start to partake with this, in future tournaments or in future games, because Cloud9 made some pretty good decisions. A lot of the roster changes that they have happened with Cloud9 have all been through the Cloud9 Eclipse team. You obviously saw the rise of Assault through the Cloud9 Eclipse roster. They put him on the main roster, swap him and Mochila. Mochila is now playing for Cloud9 Eclipse, so on and so forth. There have been a number of different changes that have happened, and it's all been a really, really interesting factor to see, because Cloud9 Eclipse has not had to make any decisions with any other rosters besides themselves. So it's only fitting and it's only normal that you would expect to see Silly and Swarly most likely join the roster of Cloud9. Now, I've heard information that I'm not 100% allowed to talk about with the Cloud9 team, but just know that it is incredibly likely that the roster right now for Cloud9 is Assault, Havoc, Silly, and Swarly. Those guys are looking to try and form a team. It's no surprise. This was a thing that happened around 2 days ago, I believe, but it was announced today that Dito kind of solidified that. I mean, if you're anyone, you kind of realize that, hey, Silly and Swarly off the team. Just so happens that there's one player off of the Cloud9 team. You would think that maybe Happy also gets released. I'm not sure. And if anyone has maybe a tweet from Happy, if he's released anything yet, I'm not 100% sure. But if you have anything, feel free to let me know. I'm not 100% sure. But either way, though, it's only fitting, it's only likely that we do see Happy most likely tweet out shortly, or at least, the announcement comes and Cloud9 says, hey, welcome, our new roster will be officially announced. Silly as well as Swarly to the team. However, though, I have a little bit of question marks, though, around the team. I think this is a very talented roster. I mean, Silly, a great AR player, an AR player who can literally run around the map, which is going to be great. The slang is big for them. There's some young guys in this team, and it's also great to see the combination, of course, of Havoc and Silly again. The great duo, in some ways, we kind of put him that way throughout, Advanced Warfare. These guys are good, man. These guys are talented. And if you want to put together and kind of compare, like I said, to basketball in previous episodes that I've said, a big three is important to have on a roster. And I think Cloud9 might have cracked the code when it comes down to younger players, because they now have some top ARs. They have a great sub player in Havoc. Some people might call him overrated. That's totally fine if you want to say that. But it's very rare that we do see something like that happen with this talented of a guy, and the slang numbers that he consistently puts up, and the consistent hours that he plays. It's not just like, oh my gosh, I'm trying to get in the Call of Duty World League, I'm going to start playing at 2v2 sniper tournaments. He's doing this on a regular basis. He's doing this on a regular basis and playing at a high level all the time. And he has a great stream as well. If you guys want to check him out, feel free to. I'm not sure his exact Twitch link. But just know that he is the real deal. I think he is. I think he's the real deal. I think he's going to be a consistent player for a while. So I'm just going to kind of point that out there. So Dino announces himself, of course, and Mox will be looking for 2. We can kind of get a little bit of an idea of the fact that most likely Silly and Swirly will be joining the roster. My whole point behind that whole talk was that my whole eye, though, my entire eye, but my focus is going to be on Swarly, right? Swarly, great player, good objective guy, isn't going to post the biggest numbers in the world. He's a good communicator from what I've been able to witness. I watched the Cloud9 Eclipse roster pretty close, heading into a couple of events. He's a good player. Got a little bit of experience under his belt. I'm trying to remember the exact team. I know it was Carnage. He played with H2k, one of H2k's original teams back in Advanced Warfare under the organization known as Carnage. That's where obviously H2k kind of got his name. Later went to Stunner, then later went to a number of different teams. That's kind of like where I previously know him from. But he's a good player, though. He's a good, solid, objective player. However, though, if you want a group of guys, and if say that maybe Silly's not having the best games, say Assault's not really getting the job done with the AR, I'm not 100% sure that if they need the slang power, that you can rely on someone like Swarly to maybe produce that. However, though, I will raise the question and the point that if you need someone to consistently post high SMG numbers, Havoc is the guy who's going to do that a majority of the time. So I look at this and say, well, on a normal team, on a normal roster, you probably want to have, obviously you want to have 4 good overall players who can do their role effectively and get kills. That's the main goal of Black Ops 3. It's the main goal of Call of Duty in all of its fame and glory. Have guys who can do the objective, have guys who can kill, and you will win. You will win. But this is the fact where you don't necessarily have the best sub-slayer in Swarly. However, though, he can get the objective work done, and he's willing to do that. He's willing to do the dirty work. But the thing is, he's not the best player at getting kills whenever he has to, and maybe if he's in those situations. But you do have a player who stands not really in front of him, but stands off to the side of him and says, you know what? I can get the slaying done. I can get the slaying done on a high effective level. I can take care of the pre-snipes. I can take care of the S&D strategies. I can clutch up 1v1, 1v2s. I'm used to it. However, though, that is a factor to where if Havoc does have an off game, because it's going to happen, Havoc's going to have an off game. It's not that Havoc is invincible and he's going to play extremely consistently forever, obviously. But if that time does come, and it's in a very clutch situation, that could be the time where we see maybe Swirly try and step up. So, in my opinion, I think this is a good team. I think this is a good young roster. You don't really have a super amount of, you don't have a whole lot of veterans on this team. This is probably one of the younger teams if you look at teams who might qualify for the Call of Duty XP, or teams coming into Orlando or something like that, and you look at this team and you're like, hey, where's the veteranship on this roster? Well, they may not have that, but they do have a lot of heart. They have a lot of guys who want to make something happen. And what we've seen in the past, we've seen some really good younger teams make runs that no one expected that they would. You look at the roster that had Chino, Cinder, Miyagi, Slasher. What was that? Vanquish or something like that? That wasn't Vanquish, was it? Noble Vanquish? No, it was just Noble. I know for sure it was Noble. That was kind of one of the original rosters back in Ghost where people were like, this team's not going to do too much, and yet they come out and they're one of the best teams at that time. You have rosters like Enigma 6, super talented roster. They kind of end up splitting apart. However, they were a very talented roster. And the biggest, in some ways, surprise of them all with the younger group of guys, 4 group of guys who've been playing with each other for a while, who know each other, is TR, or what was the previous Elevate squad. And those guys rose to the occasion and ended up making a champs run, in which case they were the runners-up at Call of Duty Champs in Advanced Warfare 2015. And I'm not comparing them and saying that these guys are going to be on that level. I'm just saying that the fact is that you don't always need a huge veteran leader on a team for them to be successful. Now, does that help? Of course it does. Of course that is going to make the team much better automatically. But if you have a lot of guys who have a similar mindset, who have the only thought in their mind is that they want to win, they want to practice, they want to scrim as much as they possibly can, we want to place as high as we possibly can, then that is when chemistry clicks, that's when teams start to form, that's when stuff starts to work out in general. So in my opinion, I don't think this is going to be a major issue with the team in particular, but I am curious to see how they do perform. Really curious to see how Swirly performs as well. I think he could definitely... I don't think he can make them break the team. However, though, I think he could definitely kind of solidify them as whether they are big deal or a big name, or to whether they kind of stay on a consistent basis, whether they are that, in contention top 5, top 6 squad, because they are making a pretty big change, right? They're getting rid of Happy, most likely. Of course, maybe Happy comes back. I'm not 100% sure. Maybe they're trying out Swirly, for this team. However, though, it is a big deal how Swirly's performance does, because it can definitely kind of portray how this roster does. So, guys, we'll be right back, taking a quick commercial break. I believe it is close to the top of the hour right now, about 15 minutes away, quarter till, and we'll be back talking about some more roster stuff, about TSM squads that have been forming. Ricky, Aches, those guys have been playing a lot recently. That's kind of odd. TK, they have a new roster as well, notable targets, as well as the Infinite Warfare gameplay that has been shown, as well as their run at Comic-Con. We'll be right back. Welcome back, boys and girls. It is the HUD. I may have, may or may have not shoved down a cookie during the break. I was kind of getting a little bit hungry, and of course I need to kind of refresh my throat. Got some nice classic water here next to me. But no, welcome back, everyone, to the HUD. If you guys have missed or have missed the first half of the show, no worries. I'm not going to recap it for you, but you can go back and watch the VOD. Maybe we'll go back on my YouTube channel, watch the entire episode as they do come out. And of course, you guys want to follow on social media. If you're to follow, look at the top. See the HUD TV, L1 Lando on Instagram. I'm not going to find anything there as far as the HUD is considered. But hey, if you guys want to follow me on there, feel free to do so. You see the Lando Con on Twitter. It's my personal Twitter, and Air Landon for YouTube VODs, which do contain every single episode that has happened with the HUD if you guys are curious or interested. Now, one thing I want to point out, this is mostly toward the Twitch viewers right now that are live, because we are live. But if you guys would like to, I did actually have a list of Nightbot commands that I have put out there. So if you guys are curious, if you guys would like to, maybe for future, if you guys want to put in the chat, exclamation point, you will see Oh my goodness, all of the new lists of Nightbot commands, which do contain social media, gamer tag. If I'm streaming, people are curious about my gamer tag. You guys want to add me there, feel free to do so. And then code red, which means when my mic happens to go mute or something crazy happens in the stream, feel free to do that. Type it in the chat. Get used to it, get acquainted with it, because I'll be adding more commands. If you guys are curious what commands are there, all you do is type an exclamation point twice, and you will find it. So, with that in mind, of course, we have talked about roster talk, now that we've kind of, gotten that out of the way. Like I said, this is funny to me. So I was like, how am I going to talk about, roster changes for this long? Because to me, basically 3/4 of the show. And since because I have 4 overall topics to talk about, I do have to talk about the other things. That's not going to stop me, though. That is not going to stop me from continuing to talk about what has happened with roster moves, as well as the gameplay breakdowns that have happened for Infinite Warfare, because I have talked about that. So to give a little bit of a recap, I see Virtual Box just typed in the chat. You know what? I will read what has happened so far. And if you guys start typing in code red, and it's not true, I may or may not have a problem with that. Because it does happen on occasion. I don't know when it happens. In the previous episode, someone's been previously saying, "Oh my gosh, your mic is muted." Everyone's like, "No, it's not." And they're like, "Oh, I mean, how do you not know?" Okay, never mind. I'm going off on a rant here, but still, use them wisely. If you see that at the very end of the Nightbot quotation or the quote, it does say, "Use them wisely, please." I did ask nicely, so I'd appreciate if you treated me nicely back. Okay, so roster moves that have happened that are official. You can put that in quotes if you want. Dan, don't do that to me. I literally freaked out for a second. So roster moves that have officially happened. Lacefield has basically tweeted out that he has left H2k. Lamagod has made it known that he has left the Cloud9 team. It's not official yet, but from what I've heard through the grapevine and through what I have heard, it is that the current Cloud9 team that they're going to be running with for a current roster is going to be Silly, Havoc, Swarly, and Assault. Okay, now people are talking about how will we know if your mic is muted, you don't have a face cam. Well, you can listen, George. You can listen, man. With your ears. I'm just messing with you guys. No. That's been the stuff that has been officially announced. Now, the stuff that we're talking about is squads who have been playing with one another. That isn't necessarily 100% likely. It's not 100% that's going to happen because, as everyone knows, as everyone has stated, that a roster can change from day to day. A player can say, you know what, I'm not feeling comfortable with this team. I might leave. I might go on to something else. So with that in mind, feel free to kind of take that into consideration. So the first thing I want to talk about is TSM, yet not TSM, because technically they are called TSM, but they're not under the Team Solo Mid organization name anymore. So I will be referring to them as TSM, but do take into consideration that they are not really TSM. They are TBA, or if you want to call them, because they were previously, question mark? Should we call them question mark? You could do that. It's kind of funny, though, that TSM was looking for a name, and then now they don't have one. Just kind of funny to kind of point that out. Either way, though, it's not really been announced, but we can in some ways assume the fact that TSM, or question mark, has in some ways lost their very, very talented player in Cole Chan. It has been rumored for a very long time, since we saw the TSM struggles, what would Cole Chan do? Because in some ways he's in a similar situation to someone like Lacefield, in which case he's in some ways kind of like the star of the team. He's going to post consistent numbers on a pretty regular basis. Not comparing that their situations are in any way exact, but they are in some ways in a similar position. Not saying that TSM doesn't practice, not saying that whatsoever. But what has been happening is that if you have watched their scrims, if you have watched what they've been doing as of late, and I'm not saying that anything has happened with Cole Chan, I'm not saying that is going to happen, but it is a possibility, is that they have recently been playing with Burns as a replacement, which means that Weeks, Pac-Man, and Ivy have been looking for someone. They've been scrimming with someone else. And the question is, does this really improve the roster, right? And I love Burns. Burns is a great dude, probably one of my favorite guys in the community. Awesome guy. But I don't think he's necessarily under the definition of what would be a main Slayer. He's not under the definition of where I would say, oh my gosh, that's a guy who can completely change the tide of a team. He's had great moments, and he's a good player. Burns is a great player. He can do his objective work. Just so happens he hasn't had a whole lot of success through Black Ops 3. He was on Team Liquid. Granted, they did get reverse sweeps in the best of 7 H2k. That's kind of out of our minds. Not really. It's probably always going to be there. But still, he's a great player. But he's not in the definition of what would be a Slayer, which is what, in some ways, at least in my opinion, the TSM needs. Because, in my opinion, now that you've added, and if you want to put in quotations, if he has been added to the team, I'm going to point this out. I'm not saying that Cold Chain is off of TSM, or what would be question mark. However, what I am saying is that based on what has happened recently, what has been talked about on Reddit, which you shouldn't take everything from Reddit. However, though, is that it has been known that TSM has not really been practicing with him, being Cold Chan, and that they have been practicing. I witnessed it with my own eyes. They have been playing with Burns, I believe, for the last 2 nights. So it's basically set in stone. Everything is announced, right? No, it's not. It's not true at all. But though, it is important to mention. It is important to note that I'm not sure that this team would be a roster to really put out there as an improvement. As much as I want to compare Cold Chan and Burns off, you want to do it. I mean, they're both sub players, but generally you can't really do that at all. Do the definition of, well, what is Burns' role? He's more of a objective-minded guy. He's going to be having trophies. He's going to be having the sub. And what worked with the Team Liquid roster so well is, of course, you had Merc and Study who got the slaying roles done. Study was more of a roaming Slayer. Merc was a little bit of a slower-paced, AR player as well. Study was an AR player. You had Apathy, who was an incredible SMG player, was moving around the map, literally one of the most aggressive players in all of Black Ops 3, who was really getting it done, and that opened a lot of free space for Burns off to kind of be that second wave of defense in some cases. When it came down to hardpoint, he would have the trophies, he would lay those down, he would do a great job at making sure that they could set up for hardpoints, and they did it very effectively a lot of the time. But my main point is that TSM is a team who literally needs to add a Slayer to this team now, because Ivy is an objective player. He's an objective player. So what you're doing is you're adding and putting on 2 objective players on the same team. And that generally doesn't work. That generally doesn't happen. It doesn't automatically like say, oh, you know what, you were previously an objective player, now become a Slayer. It doesn't really work that way. And I think a Slayer in some cases can maybe transition to more of an objective player, but that doesn't always work either. Because I'm not saying that a sub player can't become a Slayer, but a Slayer can become what am I trying to say? An objective player. It is difficult, though. It is very, very difficult to make that transition happen. Because if you're a Slayer generally and you want to go back to an objective role, well, a lot of the time you might be pushing on something that you shouldn't. And that's the thing with being an objective player, is that it is a role in which case the Twitter scene, that the scoreboard, that the commentators, I'll even grant it, if I see an objective player not playing very well, a lot of the times I will just look at the scoreboard and say, wow, that guy is 18, or not 18, let's just say he's 12 and 20. He's definitely not having a very good game. When in reality, he could have freed up a lot of easy lanes for his teammates. He could have made great rotations. He could have maybe even earned some streaks, put down trophies that saved his teammates' lives. He could be making plays, but the objective player will never go down as a player who's as important as a Slayer. And that's how it happens with Call of Duty. So in my opinion, the objective role, in its great glory, which no one really seems to respect it as, which I do, personally. I respect anyone who plays the objective role. It's not an easy role to play. Like I said, even Twitter, the backlash on Twitter. Not many people will call you a good player if you are an objective player. That's just how it is. Anyone who has been a pro or is a pro or they don't even have to be a pro to realize that. If you've played on stream, if you've played in any way where people on Twitter are watching you and you're not playing your best game as far as kills are concerned, you're going to receive backlash. And that's hard for the objective player to kind of hold on his back because in some ways he's holding the team, he's holding the weight of the pressure that's on his shoulders to do well in slang. And in past, we've not seen a great performance out of squads who have, in some ways, assembled more than one objective player in the subcategory. One team we want to point out, Optic Gaming, Back and Ghost, right? They add Mbos to the team. Granted, the position that they were in didn't really work out for them. Not trying to bring back such an extreme opportunity or an extreme case that happened a long time ago. But that is one case of many that have happened where teams have tried to put in another objective player and it hasn't worked out. Now, granted, they had some good moments here and there, but by no means did they have the subs presence to compare and go up against other squads. Just because of the fact that Nadeshot wasn't the best at getting kills, but he could do the objective work. Mbos was the same way, more of an S&D type of player. Nadeshot was the exact same thing. They played the exact same role, and the issue with that is that you're going to have a player who has played the objective role for most of his lifetime, being Burns off, and now he's going to have to, in some ways, either tiptoe around Ivy as far as the objective work is concerned, or Burns either going to have to step up as Slayer, or Ivy's going to have to step up as Slayer. And I'm not sure that either one of them can do that on a super consistent basis, because Burns isn't the most consistent guy when it comes down to getting the slaying done at all times. And we know that Ivy isn't the best at getting slaying done when it comes down to it on a consistent basis. And that's not taking anything away from them, but they do their job, and they do it right. They do their job correctly. And that's not anything taking away from them as far as kills are concerned, and they can get it done at times. But it's not like you have a backcourt and you're like, oh, well, all we need to do is just kind of work on our front court and we'll be fine. It's the fact of, well, Weeds and Pac-Man, they're good players. Especially, I think this is honestly one of the best, to me, this is probably one of the best games that Weeds has ever had is Black Ops 3. And he very often goes unnoticed as to how talented he has been. Transitioning from an SMG player who's kind of gets in the hill all the times to kind of being that AR player once Proofy left. So the overall transition of his game has been very, very noticed, at least in my opinion, and really goes to show how well-versed he is in the game of Black Ops 3. So I'm not taking anything away from him. I think Pac-Man has had a good title in this game as well. You know, Pac-Man, in a lot of people's opinions, isn't the best player, and that's true. He's not the best player in the world, but he can get the job done. He can lead in slaying at times, and he can get the job done. However, though, when you're facing off against a Rise Nation, you're facing off against an Optic Gaming and Envious, when it comes down to it, if you're trying to qualify and say that someone's not doing the best and you need a sub player to step up, well, now you're kind of relying on two previous objective players to try and get that job done. And in reality, their title doesn't really necessarily live up to what would normally be that answer. And I'm not sure if they could be that answer, if you get where I'm coming from. So I'm not taking anything away at all from the guys of TSM or what is TBA or question mark, if you guys want to give them that title right now. But I'm not sure how the roster is going to work. I'm not sure how the team is going to work as a unit together, just due to previous roles. That's all I'm saying. So I'm not trying to step on anyone's feet. I'm just trying to say from my perspective how it looks. Look at the TSM team, that you've lost a great player in Kulchan, without a doubt one of your top slayers. Him and Wheats are probably the top slayers. You want to kind of put that in consideration. However, they are losing a big player. If he does end up leaving the team, because that would be a huge, massive hit to a team who desperately needs a main slayer to kind of in some way not only lead them. Cause I think at times, Kulchan was a great player, but when they would protect the sniper rifle and search and destroy, granted, is it really worth it to try and get that sniper rifle out of the game, or try to keep that in the game for one of your teammates who might occasionally have a good game? I'd say it's probably like around 33% of the time he was going to, make a huge impact with it. So with that in mind, TSM, they release potentially Kulchan. Kulchan I might want to say release, but he might leave that particular team. For those who don't know, TSM has, in a recent article, made notice that they are trying to step away from the Call of Duty scene. I want to say that step away isn't necessarily permanent, because they've made notice and made argument that they have or might be willing to potentially sign a roster in the future. They mentioned Call of Duty XP in the article, saying that, hey, just because we're stepping out, just because we're releasing our team and giving them the rights, does not mean that we are interested in necessarily getting out of Call of Duty. But it seems that they are right now trying to back away from this current roster. And in generality, if they knew that the whole thing with Kulchan was coming, if that was something that they had talked about in past, then maybe it was in their best interest. Maybe it was in their best interest to not necessarily have a payroll for guys that they were in some ways having under their wing. And maybe they didn't feel confident in the guys. Maybe they didn't feel confident in the team, and that they didn't want to have these guys on their roster, in which case that they weren't going to be playing in tournaments until Orlando and Call of Duty XP, when in generality they didn't feel confident in them in the first place. So that might be the case. I'm not saying that it is. I'm not saying that it's not. However, though, I'm not sure what's going on with TSM right now. Curious to see what kind of happens with that. So moving on to teams that have been, kind of forming. Maybe in quotations you could put a roster here and there. But the major one that everyone has been looking at, and the one that I was talking about earlier that has kind of happened, is this newly formed squad. I'll put it that way, a newly formed squad, which consists of Ricky, Parasite, Lacefield, and Aches, which is rumored to be under the Complexity brand. That's not set in stone. That's not 100% the thing to happen. But in my opinion, if you were to ask me if this is a team who heads into Orlando, or are they under Complexity? I think they're going to be under Complexity if this team sticks together. And that's an important thing to mention, is that you have Mr. Patrick Price, Mr. Christopher Duarte, a.k.a. Haggy, a.k.a. Parasite, on the same team. Which immediately kind of pulls up like, whoa, that's happening? Are they actually going to try and be a squad together? They've tried in past. It's worked at times. But in reality, when you have those two guys at the same roster, Aches, who by no means at all, is a guy who will let anyone tell him that something. Well, okay, I'll say it this way, because I'm not trying to be rude, because it's not really. I feel like if I would have said what I said, it wouldn't have been true. Aches is a guy who, if he has an opinion and he feels like you are wrong, he will let you know that. And Parasite is a guy that if he thinks you are wrong, then he will let you know that. So you have some big personalities on the same team with one another. You have some big personalities who are on the same team with one another. And my question is, how long will it last? Is this a team who can last through Orlando? Is this a team who can last through Call of Duty XP and be on the same team with one another? Because that's important to mention, right? That's an important topic, an important thing to bring up, because I'm not sure if these guys can function on the same team or not. And that's just the way that I feel about it. You know what I mean? It's the way that I feel about it, and I'm pretty, set in stone about it. But you do have really, really talented guys around them. You look at Ricky kind of more of a guy who, to me, over his entire career has been looked upon at not necessarily the best team, but have been a very, very talented group. Did I say group? I meant a talented guy who has been on, some inconsistent groups. Ricky more of an objective-minded guy. He's talented beyond belief. He can get the objective work done, and he's willing to get throughout Ricky's entire career, he has lived on being consistent when he needs to. And if he needs to play the objective or he needs to kind of play that support role, he can do that. So to me, I'm a huge fan of Ricky, man. I'm a huge fan of Ricky, and I think he constantly goes unnoticed because he only shows up when he has to. He, in some ways, kind of plays the karma role for Optic Gaming, if I want to kind of put it in that particular perspective. Because if you have this team, and say maybe Parasite isn't dropping numbers, Lacefield is kind of struggling, which I'll talk about him in just a second. You also have Aches. Ricky is a guy who can, not easily, but he's a guy who can definitely step up for your team and constantly do that in any game mode. It's not just, in Hardpoint, just in Search and Destroy. It's that, especially in Search and Destroy, but also in Respawn, the man can step up and he can drop some major bombs if he's having a good game. He's also a great communicator. And he's played with Parasite in the past. He's played with, I'm sure he's played with a lot of these guys past. Maybe not Lacefield. But he's a familiar guy. He's a veteran in the scene and will always be, to me, as one of the best players that we've ever had in the Call of Duty scene, but will not be labeled as such because of obvious reasons, because of his role that he doesn't have to play, but does whatever is necessary to get the W out. So along with Ricky, along with Parasite and Aches, I did talk about Lacefield earlier. Very talented SMG player. To me, probably a top 8, top 7 SMG player right now in the world. Based on his previous performances, that's obviously on the H2k / early Apotheon team. So I don't really have a whole lot to base off of that otherwise, because I do have, like I said, I did talk about him earlier whenever he was on Mutiny back in Advanced Warfare. I casted over him with Reviction, with Neglect. What was that? I forgot the team that I talked about earlier, who they were on with. Who was that? I can't even remember the team. Mutiny. Yeah, it was Mutiny. I already said Mutiny. He's been a talented player throughout the end of Advanced Warfare toward Black Ops 3. He's been a very consistent guy. A guy who's very aggressive SMG player. He get the work done. He get the slang done. You know what I mean? He's a great Heatwave player. Him and Legal worked incredibly well whenever they were practicing on the H2k lineup. So this is a team who easily, and I think definitely should try to make this happen. I know I did talk about a little bit negatively around the whole Parasite and Aches thing, but if they can get this thing going, if they can play together, which still to me is in question, those two guys are very, very, very talented. Aches is a great player at this game. Don't let anyone tell you differently. Aches is a very, very talented player when it comes down to Black Ops 3. Parasite, everyone knows him as a great player. Oftentimes he's known as the greatest player, but the worst teammate is what people have labeled him as. And no one can really take that away from him. It's true, right? I mean, you've seen the VODs, you've seen the arguments that he's had with teammates in past. More recent one has been DT, where he just didn't really want to hear the communication that was going on with them. Not going to talk about that right now, but you have heard the issues with Parasite in the past when it comes down to his overall chemistry. But if he's working with guys that he knows are solid, if he's working with guys that he knows that he can trust and are good overall players, you have guys like Ricky, you have guys like Parasite, or guys like Aches, who he knows are big time. He knows that they are good, consistent, solid players. So to me, This is a good lineup. This is a very, very talented lineup. I'm curious to see. I think this is actually a really good point. I was actually getting ready to mention. I had it in my notes. Mason brought up. I said, but those three want to run AR is what I'm saying. That's a good point. That's a very good point that he mentions there, because I wanted to kind of bring that up as well. Is the AR to sub ratio. Because who's going to run the sub? Who's going to be running that sub role? Because when it comes down to this team, you're most likely going to have Parasite run that one. Aches, to me, probably going to be running the AR as well. I think you're going to see Ricky kind of transition to that sub role, at least in my opinion. It's not odd at all for Ricky to run a sub. And that's the beauty of it. Because, granted, they can have arguments. That could lead to arguments as well, granted. And I've not seen their VODs or their scrims or that often, so they could be switching things up. But in my opinion, when it comes down to the overall, what normally is going to happen besides, the infections, the evacs, where things are going to be a little bit more extreme. So I would assume that it would be Ricky who does transition to the sub, but it could be anyone. It could be anyone. I'm just saying from what would normally be happening. And of course, different squads can work. Different squads can happen to where, on this team, I should be running an AR. Well, on this team, I should be running a sub. So, I'm actually looking at the chat right now. Nat Wizzo said, did Aches tweet out about becoming an SMG? Almighty said, in the scrims right now, they are... Okay, this is great. Thank you, Almighty. In the scrims right now, they are switching Ricky to an AR. Chris is the OBJ. Interesting. That is very interesting. So, of course, they are working at different things. With Chris kind of running the objective work. That goes to show that they're willing to change up roles. That's important. They're willing to change up roles, and they're willing to kind of change what has been a regular game plan for them throughout Black Ops 3, which could work as a positive thing, but it also could be negative because if they don't want to run a certain role, they're not feeling comfortable running a certain role, they want to switch. Well, hey, we don't want to switch either. You got to stay where you're at. Well, obviously that can lead to arguments. So, interesting team. It's rumored to be under Cole. People are saying the new Cole, hashtag new Cole, I think is a thing on Twitter. That I've at least seen someone mention on Reddit. So yeah, it's a pretty good team. I'm liking the roster. It's a solid group, and I'm curious to see how they do. Hopefully that the arguments or the big personalities don't, come to clash or anything like that. But we'll move on. I know I've been talking a lot about rosters. I just kind of move on and stuff. Next team is kind of in a to-be-announced thing. You can kind of throw out insert roster here when it comes down to, what this team organization you think would be under. This roster, I might as well just go and say the team, obviously, I believe is currently consisting of Exotic, Royalty, Mochilla, and Llama God. So I talked about earlier, this is a team that I have seen scrim a few times over the past few days. Llama God and Mochilla, obviously really good friends, previous teammates at the beginning at South Carolina, just overall good friends with each other. I know Mochilla was good friends with the guys, at ISO for a very long time as well, and have been really working out, I think, pretty well. I think they've been working out pretty well with one another in past. Wait, am I reading something wrong here? I apologize. Yes, I said Llama, and I meant to put Remy. That is something that I do apologize about. Thank you for correcting me in the chat. Because I was talking about that, I was like, wait, did I mention that earlier? I think I might have added Llama God, or maybe he had been practicing with them, but I meant to say Remy. I did meant to say Remy. I do apologize about that, but thank you very much. So, change of plans. Remy, thank you, whoever put that in the chat. I apologize. So, of course, previous teammates being Royalty and Remy together. This is actually how my notes. It makes more sense now that I'm looking at my notes and saying certain things. It does make sense now. Thank you. But obviously the previous teammates of Royalty and Remy at the beginning or at the end of what was 100 Thieves, Remy gets added to the team. It was a major discussion of what would happen to 100 Thieves. Johnny gets off the team. They add back previous players. They put Aches on the team. What would kind of happen with the roster? And then it was rumored that Royalty and Remy were going to leave and form on a different squad, so on and so forth. And I think they're a good player. I think they're good players. I think Remy's going to be a great player as far as the objective work is considered. He's also got the slang down as well. We've seen that not just on Elevate, but on previous rosters in the past. And I think through Black Ops 3, he's definitely gotten a good mixture. Because whenever I said he was released from the Elevate team, I was like, well, you look at his previous history, right? You look at his previous history, he's really only used to playing with guys that are on or were previously on the TR team. he was used to play with Aqua. He was used to playing with Nagafin and Facento. When he did have that roster swap happen, he was still with Nagafin. He was still with a guy that he felt comfortable with. So to me, he's definitely kind of stepped out of his comfort zone for Black Ops 3, which is important to note. And, he obviously found a home on 100 Thieves. Granted, it didn't work out very well for them at all. But he's made a friendship with Royalty that apparently has transitioned over to new teams, which is very, very important to kind of bring up. So the to-be-announced team is Exotic, Royalty, Mochila, and Remy. I've already talked about, we all know Royalty, right? We all know the ability and the skill that Royalty possesses. If you don't know who Royalty is, I promise you, you will know soon. You will know soon. Because this guy is the real deal. He is the real deal, man. He is someone who has, to me, how do I put this? He's going to be questioned, Call of Duty. He's going to be questioned and say, how can you play on a freaking 15 sensitivity and still play incredibly well? And it was really strange to whenever Epsilon NA announced, whenever Swanee was on the team, and they announced the new player who's going to be the final addition to this roster, and they say Royalty, everyone's like, yeah, it's this guy from Canada. Apparently he's pretty good. Little did we know what he would be able to do and what he would be able to possess as far as his Advanced Warfare run would go. Now, later he would be dropped, I believe, I think right before Worlds happened, or World Finals happened, I think at MLG. That might be wrong, but I don't think he played for the same team. Epsilon NA, I think he was dropped to that team, because I think they picked up Aqua from Envy. If my mind does serve me correctly, I think that was what happened. And Remy was actually on that team. I think that was a good point. Godorex mentioned in the chat as well. What's up, Godorex? I didn't even see you, man. He did mention as well that Remy and Royalty did play in prior, and that's actually very true as well. I don't think that I meant to mention that. I'm not sure if I did mention that or not. So yes, moving on though. Royalty, incredibly talented guy. Like I said, in some ways, I can't even explain. He can make an AR look like a sub. He can make a sub look like an AR. It just does not make sense how incredibly solid that this guy is. It's absurd, right? So you obviously have a great AR presence in at least one of your players. Then you move on to Mochila, right? Very consistent guy throughout Advanced Warfare. Played on Optic Nation for a majority of the times where a lot of people kind of know him from. Was the main slayer for that team. Was kind of swapped down from roster to roster for Black Ops 3. Played early on with Mochila and Ego and Lamagod. Or I said Mochila. Lamagod, Examples, and Ego. At South Carolina. Didn't have the best performance there, but they had some good moments here and there. I know he's not always considered to be the best AR player in the world of the game, but he is solid. He is a very solid player. So to me, that adds just another kind of card in the deck, if you will, for this to-be-announced team. So with that in mind, you have your ARs covered. We talked about Remy. Great objective player. Can get the work done. And we also have Exotic. Now, Exotic, to me, was someone who I was able to kind of scout out very early on, and I don't want to say early on, but like a couple months ago, before he was picked up by TK, before he was on that team, in which case, I was actually at a tournament known as EGLX. Now, EGLX is obviously a Canadian, I don't want to say obviously, but it is a Canadian tournament, and essentially, there were two squads. There were two squads at EGLX that ended up happening. And Exotic was on one. I cannot remember the exact name of it. I need to look that up, actually. But the other one was known as MGIH. MGIH was, I believe... I'm trying to think here. I'm trying to make sure my mind does serve me correctly. I believe that it was Gunjar, Modi, Ivy... I'm trying to think who else. Who else am I missing here? MGIH. And Royalty. Or not Royalty. Holler. It was Holler. Thank you very much. I'm sorry. I apologize for that. And Holler. And those guys lit up EGLX. They lit up EGLX. And they played incredibly well. They ended up taking first and played just overall at a very consistent basis. They played very, very well. And I was honestly really impressed. I was kind of curious because Royalty wasn't playing on that team. I think he was playing on STDX for that particular tournament. And there was certain rosters that maybe could have kind of put in contention. There were some teams that might have been able to kind of contest them potentially. But in reality, though, it was really no contest because of how talented that guy was. However, there was one guy that definitely caught my eye, and that was Exotic from a team known as Avantic. Avantic was a group of guys who I think recently formed, and I was talking to Holler a lot at EGLX. Talked to him about certain games, how they were feeling in the tournament. They felt pretty good, and he was bringing up to me the whole thing before TK, before Holler and Exotic were on the TK team, saying that how talented Exotic is, and that Theory was looking to pick those two up to make a team. And they said, we don't really know a fourth yet, which would obviously later be Khalifa. But he was like, yeah, I played. I think Holler was actually on Advanced before MGIH or MGI had officially picked him up to go to this team and play, obviously, at the tournament. And he was just talking about how talented that he was and how great of a sub player he is. Granted, he's a little bit rough around the edges, but generally, he is very, very good. Which is important to mention. So I was able to witness him. Once Hollard kind of gave me that information, I was like, okay, I'm going to watch this guy Exotic, and he lit it up. He was consistently slaying at a regular basis in all the games that Avantic had. Without a doubt, if it wasn't for him, they would have not gotten to that second place. And generally, I watched him, got to know him a little bit, and he was later drafted to the TK team. Granted, I had the best performance at Anaheim. He did play pretty well from what I was able to witness, what I was able to watch. And now he's obviously transitioning to playing with, more known guys. So the fact is that you have Royalty and Exotic, guys who are both from Canada, guys who know each other. You have Royalty and Remy, who've known each other for a very, very long time. Exotic, like I said, who's a very talented overall player when it comes down to it. Great sub player, great sub slayer as well. Definitely one of the main slayers when it came to that TK lineup, along with him and Holler. Kind of sad they're not on the same team right now. But generally, this is a good roster. And I'm not sure if this is the team who's going to stick. I'm not sure if this is the team who's going to last for very long. But they can make a run, and they can make something happen because they've got some really solid guys in this team. If you need someone to rely on, you got guys for days, man. You've got guys that, if you're worried about someone stepping up, or if you need someone to have a consistent game, this team screams consistency to me. This team screams consistency to the point where I'm like, if I'm worried if Royalty's not going to have a good game, which is very rare, then I have Exotic who can definitely step up, who's normally already going to be doing that already. You have Mochila, who's incredibly consistent. You also have Remy, who can get the slaying done, but is going to be more of an objective player, which is very rare to see a great objective player who can also do the slaying role as well. Which Remy isn't known as a slayer, but he's definitely put in a category where he's better than most. Excuse me. So, the last player, or the last team that we're going to talk about who are under the names, or under contention for being top squads, is TK. Well, okay, I should say, rumored to be TK. Now, I don't know 100%. I know GodRx is in the chat. Love GodRx. Great dude. Great guy. But, though, I'm not 100% sure this is the TK team. You would generally think that Theory, who's kind of in some ways the ambassador for the TK lineup, if he's playing with a group of guys, that most likely there is at least a good opportunity for TK to kind of come into consideration when it comes into org, will represent them. But yeah, you have this current team, which consists of Methods, GodRx, Apox, and Theory. Now, I was able to watch them play. I think it might have been against Panda the other night. If my mind does serve me correctly, it might have been Panda, I think, which they were scrimming some hard points. And I was able to watch them play, I think, against, I think it was Hate's team. It's like Hate, and some other guys. I cannot actually remember who was playing. Either way, though, I was watching them play Panda. I was watching them play some other teams, watching them scrim a little bit. I'm not sure if anyone on the team there scrims that often, from my knowledge. But generally, when you look at this team, when you look at this team in particular, most wanted, that's it. Thank you very much, ClickHit. Most wanted. I was trying to remember which team it might have been, because Hate is obviously the most wanted guy for the most part. However, though, I like the TK team. I'm curious to see how they do. Theory has been kind of considered to be a guy who can't really get the slaying done at all times. To me, he's a very talented dude. He's a very talented player. Granted, he's kind of transitioned to past titles. Or in past titles, he's been kind of labeled as a slayer, but who really couldn't get it done in the end. For the previous TK lineup, people looked at Royalty, people looked at Exotic, people looked even at Khalifa, but they said Theory is the reason why they're not playing very well. And Theory has had an awkward transition, right? He's on a team, he's on Team Caliber, he's not having the best of runs, but granted, he's on a team who at least he's comfortable with, that he knows very, very well. And now he's at a point where Sharp retires, Gunjar leaves for complexity, Neslo leaves the team, later joins Echo Fox, which now is obviously a very successful team as far as the challenge squads are considered. Probably one of the top teams right now, if not the top, in most people's opinions, that won in the Call of Duty World League. And now he has to find a group of guys to make something happen. In which case, we obviously know what happened. Anaheim picks up, like I said earlier, Holler, Exotic, and obviously Khalifa. Tournament doesn't necessarily work out the way that they wanted to. They end up dropping all 3 players, which I might not have done. But they end up finding 3 other guys. They end up finding Apox, I believe from MW. Gotta Rex, he's in the chat right now. I don't know where he's been. I believe Gotta Rex has recently turned the age of 18. Great player from Advanced Warfare. I'm not trying to feed his ego right now. But a great player from AW. One of my favorite players to watch in all of Advanced Warfare. Played for Vanquish, probably one of the most notable teams that I can remember. There was this one snipe in particular that he almost had. I cannot remember the map. I wish that I could have. Advanced Warfare, just Black Ops maps or Call of Duty maps in general. As soon as the title is over, I sound like at least like someone who rarely played it at all, which is kind of sad. But I can't remember the map, but it nearly happened, which was crazy. Solar, thank you, Godrex. Solar, I nearly lost it, and ever since I saw that play. Very consistent guy. Very consistent player. One of the better ARs, I think, that are kind of unnoticed in the scene right now. Guys, to me, like Holler and Godarex are great ARs that just aren't really that well known. As far as like the regular pros, as far as like regular pros that you would put in a main lineup. Those 2 guys I would definitely have up there for not just AW, but also for this game. Haven't been able to watch Godarex's performance as of much. But also the other AR that you have on the team is going to be Apox. Apox, I cannot remember the exact team. I think it might have been, it was the team, I'm trying to think here. I'm having a hard time. My memory is just not good today. But I remember the first time that I saw Apox was in preparation for the Call of Duty World League Stage 1, what is it? Stage 1 qualifiers. Online qualifiers, in which case they were playing against what would be question mark at the time. And we're watching the scrim up to that point. They end up making it through the tournament. They're playing really, really well. And they end up facing off against what would be question mark at the time, with Provy still on the roster. Ivy not added yet. And they're up 2-0. They're up 2-0, and this team of guys who is just not very well known at all. Everyone's like, wow, this is going to be the team who makes it in the Call of Duty World League. No one is expecting this whatsoever. He's playing with Paranoia. By the way, Paranoia plays. Great guy as well. Good streamer. I also really enjoy his streams. What is the team name? It's really, really annoying me. I'm trying to think. Easy G. I remembered. Easy G. Easy G. They're up 2-0 over question mark and the qualifiers. The match that, thank you. See, there's only seconds away. Thank you, Fire Slice. I appreciate you saying it, but I remembered it right before you said it. They are up 2-0. 1 game away for making it to the Call of Duty World League, and question mark ends up making a reverse sweep to make it into one of the final spots in Call of Duty World League Stage 1. I can only imagine what would have happened. What would have happened if they would have closed out that match whatever time, whether it was in Game 5, Game 4, if they would have even gotten the 3-0. What would have happened if they would have won that series? However, it didn't happen. Didn't happen. Unfortunately for them. But still, though, Apox, I'm trying to think. I think he might have been, I cannot remember which roster that he was on. It might have been one of the Cloud9 teams. It might have been one of the Cloud9 teams. I'm not going to talk about it because obviously I don't remember it very well, but I remember seeing Apox in a number of different teams. He's played pretty well, hasn't had the best overall performances. It's kind of been, in some ways, kind of gone from roster to roster, but it is in some ways a very good AR player. I think him and Godarex are going to definitely do pretty good job when it comes down to that role. I've talked about Theory, talked about Apox, talked about Godarex, and you also have Methods. Methods, a guy who I have a lot of respect for. Most people are going to know him, obviously, from CLG, from Stage 1. Don't have at all the best performance in Stage 1. Make it, obviously, into the playoffs. I think by beating DT, if my mind serves me correctly. You make it, obviously, into the league. Not the best performance in the world. You have some good moments here and there. They drop, BL Fire. They add accuracy to the team. Who else do they drop? They drop Complex. They pick up Perplex. don't have the best run. Don't have the best run in the world. And up to this point, Methods has kind of been under the radar. Hasn't played with some of the best teams in the world. But he is a good player. He is a very good player. And to me, he is a guy who can easily lead a group of guys because he's been playing this game for a long time. You can look at his age. You can look at his age and say, that guy must be new. That guy hasn't been playing for very long. But in reality, he is, in my personal opinion, in some ways a veteran of the scene. Same thing with Slack. People don't realize that Slack was a captain of a Black Ops 2 roster that had Clayster on it, had Spacely on it, had Slacked on it. Or not Slacked, I already said Slacked. Huddle on it. He's been playing for a very long time, and his age can maybe deceive someone. Same thing with Methods. He's been waiting for years to go to Call of Duty Champs, to go to Call of Duty XP. And so the time has now finally risen. He's got a group of really good guys to go with in what could be TK. They had an opportunity to make it to Call of Duty XP and to perform and make something happen. So to me, I'm really, really looking forward to seeing how this roster performs. I'm curious to see how the consistency goes with the team. I think they've got some pretty good AR players. I want to see how Theory plays as well. So you've got some younger guys. You got Gonarex, you got Apox, who aren't necessarily that introduced, aren't as well versed as Methods and Theory are in the full on pro scene. But you have that transition. You have that in some ways dueling of younger guys to veterans. So I'm curious to see how this team does. 'Cause it's rumored to be one organization they're under. A lot of people are saying TK. I think that's probably one of the most likely things that we can kind of assume. So yeah, that's kind of like where we're going to kind of close it out as squads who are kind of informing. If there are any other teams, you can throw them out there. Those are just more notable players who are kind of making something happen. As far as rosters are definitely concerned, and as far as notable targets are out there, you have guys like Miracles. You have guys like Happy, Llama God. I think Holler's been playing with a couple players as well, but not really anyone as notable as maybe himself. You have Cold Chan out there, yet to find out what team he's kind of moving on to, or maybe he's trying to go back to TSM or whatever. Not sure on that. You have BL Fire, great player. I know he was playing with Exotic for a little bit of time, but I know he's kind of maybe transitioned away. He's kind of going from roster to roster and playing with some guys as well. And you have Gunjar. Gunjar, very, very good AR player. Played for Complexity, kind of inconsistent toward the end of the season. But if he has a more aggressive AR player alongside of him, I think he can definitely play that role very, very well. Whenever I think of a slower AR player, I automatically think of Fringe. I automatically think of holding back grandmas, and that is the role that Gunjar can play. He can hold a lane, he can hold a certain spot, and make sure that the hard point is going to be in control as long as the subs are doing some good things. Zoom Vimer put in the chat, Hollow was playing with Magsy and Mayhem. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for pointing that out. I think I saw him tweeting that out during the break, but I wasn't 100% sure what exactly the names of the particular players were. So I appreciate that very, very much. And now, that will kind of end the roster talk, man. That's going to end the roster talk. That doesn't end the show yet. My whole goal, actually, was to try to make the show around 45 minutes to an hour. And we were almost toward that hour and 45-minute mark. But we will quickly go through the Infinite Warfare gameplay that was shown. It's about the Infinite Warfare panel that happened at SGC. And then we might take some questions from the chat. So if you guys are curious, you guys want to have any questions, have any thoughts as well, feel free to get ready to put those in the chat. Once I start talking about Infinite Warfare and San Diego Comic-Con, feel free to start putting in the chat some questions if you guys would like to, and maybe we can go over a few of those. Before I do that, before I talk about anything involving Infinite Warfare, I want to give a couple shout-outs to people who have followed the stream. As I take a nice drink there. Hopefully that was nice and loud for the viewers at home. I'm going to give a massive shout out to, I believe the last one that we looked at was Flinny97. Thank you to Flinny. Thank you to Mason. I think I already shouted out Clemmy, Chryso Nabuk, JHoyt74, Sick and Holy, VirtualBox, Mighty Mitten _YT, and The Click Kid. Thank you guys all for following. Really, really do appreciate it. The support means a lot, guys. And hopefully you guys stay tuned for future episodes of the HUD. So, as we kind of, in some ways, go toward the downward spiral, or kind of go at a little bit of a glance toward the end of the show, recently, and I believe the other day, maybe 2 days ago, Infinite Warfare gameplay was released. Yes, it was actually a mission called Black Sky, which I believe was shown on the 21st, as far as my mind is considered. And if you guys would like to, I can actually post a link in the channel right now. Let me actually try and copy this correctly. and post in this chat for you guys if you'd like to check it out and see it. That is the link to the gameplay, and I'll maybe even post in the description of the YouTube video, the VOD, of this particular video. However, though, my original thoughts, and if you watch this, if you have watched it, it's a lot easier for us to obviously have a conversation with one another. But my original thoughts are, and a lot of people who have been kind of talking about in the comments of the videos, because I'm honestly really curious. I'm curious whenever I watch something. I'm curious to see what other people think about it besides myself. That's why I love podcasts. That's why I love doing shows. That's why I love making YouTube videos, because I want to know what other people are talking about and what other people feel about certain things besides myself. So my original thoughts in the campaign, and you have to kind of take this with a grain of salt because it's not the exact same game. Just because you have a certain gun or a certain things happen in the campaign, that does not mean at all that the multiplayer will play the same way. Great point to kind of bring up with Black Ops 3. There were so many, hoverboards. People think we're going to be driving those, hovercraft things in the actual game. Is that going to be a score streak? There were a lot of rumors about certain stuff like that. It looks like the little bike from Tron. But little did we ever even see that in multiplayer, if at all, which we probably didn't see those happen whatsoever. So along with that, my original thoughts on how I thought the mission went was that there wasn't a whole lot of jetpacking in the mission. There wasn't a whole lot of that. Which doesn't mean anything. Doesn't mean anything at all. If you've watched, it's kind of weird, right? It's a weird thing to me because when you watch someone play a campaign, whether it's at E3, whether it's at San Diego Comic-Con, whatever they release, right? They're doing their very best to make sure the game looks as good as possible. So you might see someone, it's really funny actually. At times you'll see someone who plays a campaign in Call of Duty and they will literally glide through the camera. You make sure you see every single explosion. You see every single person that dies. When you shoot your weapon, you only shoot a couple bursts at a time. It's so nice. It's so calm. But in reality, whenever you are playing the campaign, it's completely different because you're running around, you're looking behind you, your sensitivity is a lot higher than what theirs is on. You're not gliding around looking at every single explosion and how glorious it is. No, it's not at all how it is. And jetpacking can obviously completely change the game because if you're watching a campaign, then you want to watch someone run on the ground, you want to watch someone kind of transition from place to place. But if you're playing the campaign, then you're going to be sprinting from place to place. If you're watching the Advanced Warfare campaign, then I guarantee you, if you're playing the Advanced Warfare campaign, you are literally jumping constantly. And that doesn't make for good gameplay. It doesn't make for good gameplay. And I'm sure the campaign release, whenever that did happen, that was not a thing. With all the backlash that we've recently seen when it comes down to Infinite Warfare that people have talked about, the amount of dislikes, I think Infinite Warfare is like number 2 or number 3 in YouTube's all-time disliked list, which is crazy to think about. Granted, it was like a social media trend that everyone was just doing to do it. You kind of became like a joke to everyone, which is, here nor there. But they definitely could be kind of toning that down for the audience. They could be toning that down for the audience and making sure that, hey, we want to make sure that this game doesn't look as jetpacky as Advanced Warfare did. But in my mind, though, I don't think that this game is going to be nearly as jetpacky as Infinite Warfare. Now, what they've talked about, what they've released, not just what they said at San Diego Comic-Con, they've talked about how the movement is similar to Black Ops 3. I don't know personally. I have not seen any wall running. I'm not a big fan of wall running at all, for obvious reasons. So I feel like once wall runs get introduced to a particular map, that map is revolutionized forever. Breach would play completely different if we didn't have wall runs. Evac CTF, Evac Hardpoint would probably, or even Uplink as well, would run a lot more smoothly if we didn't have people wall running around the entire thing of it. That just comes down to most maps. If you have wall running, that's a major factor in a lot of stuff. It can definitely play a factor. So along with that, we talk about the jetpack. You might have been intentional. I've not seen wall running. I've not seen that happen. I don't believe that's going to happen. But I was really impressed, though, with the graphics. I was very impressed with how the graphics looked. Because normally when it comes down to Infinity Ward games, when I think about Infinity Ward games, I automatically think about and assume the graphics aren't going to look as good. It's going to be a lot of grays, a lot of browns, a lot of, graphics I think need to be tidied up a little bit. That's why I like the Black Ops games a lot more, for obvious reasons. Because I think they look nicer, I think they play better. I've not been the biggest fan of Ghost gameplay or even really as MW3. There's a lot of fans of MW3. To me, like MW3 is a really split game. Either you love it or you hate it. I was a person who really strongly disliked it, if you kind of want to put it that way. But as far as the San Diego Comic-Con went, along with them releasing the gameplay, they did talk about a number of different things. They obviously talked about the release, of the gameplay. They obviously talked about the release of the game in general, when the game's going to be coming out, which will happen in the panel. They talk about they basically kind of point out through the entire panel. They talk about how this is the final frontier. This is the next step that Call of Duty has to take. And if they want to call it the final frontier, which is space, like in reality, once space ends, once Call of Duty Infinite Warfare has ended, there is nothing higher than infinity. There is nothing higher. Like, Advanced was one thing. Infinite Warfare, in my mind, truly means that, hey, maybe we might have a throwback Call of Duty title happen. Not trying to think of Call of Duty 2018 here, but generally you got to think, though, Infinite Warfare, the final frontier, I kind of look at it as a ladder. There is only so many steps that you can take as far as advancing in gameplay before you run out of them. There's only so many pegs on a ladder that you can climb up before you get to the very top. And that's the thing I think with Call of Duty right now that we're looking at. We're saying, how advanced can we make this game get? Well, Infinite Warfare goes to show that it is infinity. You cannot beat infinity unless you want to be like one of those younger kids who said infinity times 2, which I don't think is going to happen. At least I hope not. However, though, like I said, there are only so many steps that you can take before you run out. If you're trying to make this game as technological as possible, you're trying to make this game as futuristic as you possibly can, this might be one of the last times that they can make a futuristic game and try to advance what has been this line of futuristic, movement systems, jetpacks, exosuits, whatever you want to call them. This may be one of the last times that we see that happen. Just because Advanced Warfare was like the guinea pig of the movement system, like, hey, how about you guys do this first, then we'll kind of move on from there. It seems that this cycle of games just so happens to be that we have a exo movement, game, something along those lines. So I'm sure for future titles we might see that happen, we might not see that happen. I think the backlash was honestly kind of good. I think they finally realized and said, hey, people don't like the exos. It's not just the competitive scene. It's not just here or there. It's not just the Twitter ats or anything like that. People generally do not like this particular movement style. So to me, when it comes down to everything, San Diego Comic-Con panel, trying to move on, I did really enjoy the gameplay. I thought the story, the way that it sounded, the way that it was talked about, the way it was presented was really good. Major shout out to Game Over Greggy. He did a great job at hosting. For those who know Game Over Greggy from Kind of Funny, great dude. Thought he did a great job hosting the panel as well. And of course, they did also talk about the Eternal remake. I did kind of mention that in my previous episode of the HUD, episode 2, if you guys want to maybe talk about that a little bit more, see my thoughts on it. I didn't really talk about it too much. Not going to talk about it too much here either. I think it's interesting. I think it's going to be pretty cool to see. I'm glad they're bringing back a throwback map from MW2 especially. Because a lot of people are thinking, well, maybe they add another thing to it, because apparently in Call of Duty, it's a cool thing to add an extra map in there as well to if you pre-order it and stuff like that. So I think that's a good thing to bring up. And they're not going to be bringing it back a COD 4 map because they're completely remaking the game in general. So you have a remake and not just the entire game of Call of Duty 4, but you also have a remake and at least one map coming from Infinite Warfare. So I think that's kind of cool. Graphics overall, slightly cartoonish. Slightly cartoonish doesn't necessarily always ring a major bell as far as how good they look. But I still think they look pretty good. I think they look great, honestly. And it definitely kind of surprised me for sure. Because when people talk about Battlefield, when they say, man, the Battlefield trailers, they look awesome. They look so good. So do Assassin's Creed trailers. If I could live in Assassin's Creed world, I would do that. If graphics looked like Assassin's Creed trailers did, I would live in that world. But unfortunately, Assassin's Creed is a great game, great graphics, but the trailer is not always like that. I think Battlefield 1 trailer was incredible. It was awesome, and I cannot wait to play Battlefield 1. But one thing that I like about Call of Duty is that in their trailers, they always show real gameplay footage, which is always something that I think is really important to mention. So, with that in mind, I'm really looking forward to seeing how Infinite Warfare kind of plays out. This is kind of in some ways the first teaser that we're going to have. This is one of the first steps that we're going to have as far as the transition to what would be a new title, Black Ops 3. As much as maybe you like it or hate it, it is coming to an end, and we are only going to have 2 major tournaments as we know left, being not World Finals. What am I saying? LG Orlando, and also Call of Duty XP, which is why all the roster stuff is happening, all of why that's kind of going on. So, with the last topic of the show, it's going to be probably one of the shortest ones because we are getting close to that 2-hour mark. With that kind of obviously being reached, we will take. I was going to about questions from the chat. I know once roster talk kind of ends, the chat kind of dims out, the viewers kind of dip out as well. That's totally fine. I understand that. People want to hear what they want to hear. But this was one question that I saw from YouTube, and if there is anyone who wants to put something in the chat, that's totally fine. If not, that's totally fine as well. This was a comment on one of the recent YouTube videos that I released. I believe this is episode 2. And if you guys ever would like to, if you're a YouTube listener, if you've made it all the way here, thank you very much. If you also would ever want to leave a comment down, or obviously leave a comment there in one of the YouTube videos, even if it's this one, feel free to leave a question in there. It's gonna be a lot easier for me to see it, and I guarantee you I will at least reference it, think about it, tweet it at you, or mention it in the show for sure. So the question that I received from this one on YouTube was from Rod FPS, in which he questioned and said, Lando, can you talk about the opportunities for under 18 players? Which is very important to mention. And if you guys are curious, if you guys would really like to maybe check out, I did make a video recently, which is titled, Is it worth it still to try and go pro? Or is it worth going pro? I might have that linked in the description as well to this YouTube video. If not, just go to my YouTube channel. It's one of the most recent videos that I posted maybe like a couple weeks ago. But I go really in depth about it, and I get a lot of really good feedback overall, kind of talking about it, maybe like my opinion on the scene. Because I am a big fan of amateurs. I am a big fan of following the amateur scene. Kind of seeing what happens with that stuff, kind of getting involved with it as well. And my whole opinion on is it talking about opportunities for under 18 players. I keep saying is that under 18 players obviously have it difficult because in previous titles, I'm not going to talk about this for super long. In previous titles, no matter what age you were, as long as you were maybe above the age of 12 or 13, I mean, we had kids at UMG tournaments who were 11, and granted they weren't very good, but hey, good team. Maybe future they can play something or be good. However, though, opportunities for under 18 players. There are leagues, there are local tournaments you can find that will host under the age of 18, or even just, free tournaments to come out. And my whole point is, as well as opportunities for under 18 players, it also goes to that question, is it worth it to still go pro? And I would highly suggest, I'm not just pointing at one of my videos, but I did a lot of research, I did a lot of, talking about, the opportunities and the positions of under 18 players, what it means to be under the age of 18 and still trying to become a Call of Duty professional player, or just trying to advance themselves in Call of Duty, not just in Call of Duty, but as far as esports are considered. Call of Duty, it's obviously a lot harder to become a professional. You can obviously make the transition to other FPSs. But if you are serious about it, now is the time. If you have money, if you have anything, try and save up to obviously get a Scuff, to get Astros, or to get HyperXs, good headset. Make sure that you are on the PS4, because if you're an Xbox One player, you've got to make that transition as soon as you possibly can. And now that we have Infinite Warfare, a new title to where everyone in some way starts on that same level, obviously when a game comes out, I'm not in the same level as Scum, then Scum just somehow passes me. It's obviously once you have the gameplay down, once you played Call of Duty, you're a good Call of Duty player. You're going to be a good Call of Duty player throughout every title that you play. For the most part, you're still going to be above average, at least if you're a good player, for the most part. So, opportunities for under 18 players, there are opportunities, there are leagues. One league in particular I know is Perfect Alliance. They do host tournaments that I've casted over for. A lot of really, really good young talent in those tournaments. Teams like Enigma 6, even some younger guys who have played in those tournaments. Holler's played in those tournaments. Some of the guys from Jester played in those tournaments. Guys like Nighthill. I'm not really sure who else has kind of played in those. I think guys like Magsy, the guys from Onslaught, the guys from MW, the guys from EZG, their youth team has played. Paranoia has played in those. Apox has played in those. A lot of really good guys who have kind of risen through the scene have played in those particular tournaments. I'm not giving a massive big shout out to PA here, but I have worked with them in the past, and they do run very, very good leagues. So there are opportunities here and there. There are big opportunities for you to happen. But is it worth it still? Obviously, it's a lot harder for a competitive player if you're under the age of 18 to try and make it. But I do respect the rule. I respect the rule enough to where I think it's a good thing, because if you are under the age of 18, if you are making that much money, if you're trying to drop out of school, I think obviously education is a very important thing. Not saying that someone can't obviously have and go to school and also play Call of Duty professionally, but I know what it's like to be a professional player. I know the hours that it takes to become a professional player. And your homework, whether you think it or not, is going to suffer. It's definitely going to suffer in one way or another, unless you're an absolute brainiac. And if you are, well, hey, more props to you. More props to you if you're a brainiac. That's totally fine. There's nothing wrong with that. If anything, you're blessed enough to be able to have that, quality in you. So in my mind, like I said, opportunities for under 18 players. There are leagues, there are tournaments here and there. They are a little bit scarce. But the main thing is that you are practicing it, that you are doing your very best to make sure that you are at the top of your game whenever anything will come your way. Because if you're playing with certain players, your whole goal as an amateur is to try to rise to the occasion, to try and rise and become better than teammates around you. And granted, it may be hard to step away from some teammates. It may be hard to step away from some guys that you enjoy playing with. But if you want to become a professional player, your whole goal is to keep rising through the ranks, to play as consistently as you possibly can, and make sure that you are dedicated. Because if you're not dedicated, if you don't enjoy the game, it's just not going to happen. If you love Call of Duty as much as you do, maybe the next title will be your thing. Maybe you should still practice in this game. Maybe you should still practice in Black Ops 3. But if you aren't getting close to the age of 18, if you're maybe 16, 17, more specifically to 17-year-olds, if you're going to turn 18 through the Infinite Warfare year, if you are trying to become a professional player, in my opinion, do your best and work on your game for Infinite Warfare. Now, granted, Black Ops 3 is going to happen. There might be some ending tournaments and stuff like that. But work on your game for Infinite Warfare. Try to make sure that you have everything down, that you know exactly what's going on, and start practicing with the best players that you know, and most notable players that you know as well. So thank you, Ron, for the question. I know I might not have answered it indirectly. It's kind of hard to answer exactly, everything, to try to get everything down. But if you would like to, feel free to check out my one video that I talked about when it comes down to opportunities. It's still worth it to go pro if you are under the age of 18, or maybe even trying to get to the age of 18. If you are the age of 18, feel free to check out that video. I did a lot of hard work on it. I think a lot of you guys will enjoy it. So one last question. I'm going to make this one pretty quickly. This one comes from Clemmy in the chat, and he says, what do you think about Aches, Parasite, and Lace teaming with Royalty instead of Rick? My only thing is that you do have two previous teammates. You have Aches and Royalty, who previously played on 100 Thieves. And I would say, personally, I would like the addition of Ricky more, even though I think Royalty is a fantastic player. My thing is that if I was to sub out one player from that lineup, if you had the team that you listed there, it would probably be Lacefield. Just for the fact that I think Lacefield is an incredible sub player, but if it comes down to trying to keep those big personalities in check, Ricky is the guy to do that. Ricky 100% is the guy to do that. And I think if you have some of your guys on the team, you have Lacefield, you have Royalty, who are great up-and-coming players in their own roles, Royalty and AR and Lace and SMG. They might look at the arguments coming from the other guys who are kind of the head honchos of the team. It might kind of affect their performance. When it comes to Ricky, though, Ricky's been through that, man. Ricky has been through just about everything that you can throw at him. The struggles, the success that he's had, he's been through it all. And personally, would I rather sub out Royalty for Ricky? Personally, I would probably say no, which might come as a surprise to many people, because just because you have more slaying power doesn't mean that you're a better team. Doesn't mean that just because you add more slaying presence to a roster doesn't mean that makes them better overall. Granted, they can be better for a short time, but consistency is key, man. Chemistry is more important than people give it credit for. I think when you have previous teammates between Parasite and Ricky who are great players, I think Ricky at times can be more consistent than Royalty. I've seen Royalty kind of dip off. His search and destroy game isn't the best. But I think generally if you have Ricky on this team, that is what and how Aches and Parasite can play on the same roster. So, in my opinion, thank you very much though for the question, Clemmy. I appreciate that one a lot, man. And guys, that's going to conclude it for episode number 3. This has been the longest episode that we have recorded, at least as far as I know. Episode 1 might have been long. But yeah, I appreciate it. You guys have been absolutely awesome. I've loved the appreciation and the overall support for the HUD up to this point. It's been a lot of work, but I've really, really enjoyed doing it. And I'm looking to try to make this as often as I possibly can. Talk about roster changes. People have talked about and posted, will I be uploading YouTube videos regarding these roster changes? And what I might do is maybe break off these episodes and maybe even try to cut them out so that I have certain opportunities where I could talk about things. So, for example, I'd go into this VOD of this particular episode and take out certain aspects and then post that, and then also have the link to the regular show for those who are interested. So I think that's kind of like a cool idea, kind of centralizes things around the HUD, and it also gets my entire opinion about a certain topic on the show about. So thank you so much for tuning in. If you guys would like to follow any of the social media, feel free to follow me on Twitter at L1Lando. If you guys would like to, go to the URL, type in Air Landon, or at least type in Lando COD on YouTube. You guys will obviously find me there for the previous episodes of the HUD, as well as other content there as well. Because follow me on Instagram at L1Lando. Not very useful to follow me there, but I do post on it occasionally. And for all updates regarding the HUD TV and myself, you can obviously follow the HUD TV on Twitter, giving full-on, episodes of the HUD. It's where you can find all those links, where you can find a number of different things. And obviously, it's the official Twitter of this particular show. So with that in mind, guys, thank you so much for tuning in yet again. You guys have been fantastic. Massively enjoyed the discussions that we've had. You guys are all beautiful. I'll see you later for another episode of the HUD. It's been HUD, episode 3.